Right, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Sorry, a few minutes late starting, but there were a few papers that needed to be handed round, and I wanted to give you a couple of minutes just to look at those. I can see you were. Welcome to the first meeting of this new Council's Session Scrutiny Commission. In a way, some of the items this morning are unfinished business from the last Council, particularly the presentation we're going to have shortly from Severn Trent. But the first item is accepted by the Council that I am appointed the Chairman of the Scrutiny Commission in accordance with the Council's Constitution. So that takes us to the second item, which is election of Vice Chairman. Now, can I have a nomination, please? Thank you. Is there a seconder for that? Mr. Richards, thank you very much. Any other nominations? No? Then, Rosie, you are elected as the Vice Chair of this committee. Right, minutes held of the last meeting on the 8th of March. Do you all accept that they are an accurate record of the meeting? Now, that's difficult for some of you because you either weren't here or weren't even a member of the Council. But I have had a look at them and I think they're okay. So, if you're all happy with that, okay. Thank you. Item 5, I have no questions under Standing Order 7.3 or 7.5. And item 6, I have no urgent items that need to be taken on this agenda. Item 7, declarations of interest in respect to items on the agenda. I suppose we're all consumers of water.
And district councillors.
But I don't think there's anything prejudicial in that. Does any?
Yeah, I suppose baking does consume, although you don't consume it actually.
Yeah, so I don't think there's anything particularly needed. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Declarations of the party whip. Item 8. Anyone wish to declare whip? No. Presentation of petitions. There are none to this meeting. Now, what I propose to do, bearing in mind we've got Severn Trent colleagues here, is to turn the item round rather than wait for us to look at our annual report. If you're all happy with that, we'll move to item 11, which is the housing, growth and water. I have just forgotten to point out, as we always do, these meetings are webcast live to the public. And for anyone who's not able to watch the footage, the webcast is available on the County Council's website. So it's important that when you do speak, can you make sure that you switch your microphone on, and then when you finish speaking, turn it off, because it won't cope with more than 2 or 3 at the same time. Right, so without further delay, we'll move to item 11. Could I ask our colleagues from Severn Trent to come up to the table? Yeah. So, we've got, just for the record, Doug Clark, Tim Smith and Paul Hercombe from Severn Trent Water. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for coming this morning. This is quite a big issue for us. The main issue we want to understand more about and really work with you is planned growth in Leicestershire, which I think you're aware of, particularly in relation to housing growth. And the preparation of a growth plan which is taking place at the moment as we speak, and there's going to be a major consultation on that later on in the summer. So a number of questions have been asked about, well, you know, if there's going to be significant more development on top of what we already know about going through to 2050, how are our agencies, partners, statutory bodies, undertakers planning for that? Are the views that need to be taken into consideration in relation to, well, this is a very good place, or this is a bad place in terms of your particular aspect, water and sewerage? And then I think the other thing is the public's concern is that as more and more development takes place, what impact is that having on the existing infrastructure and existing, particularly in relation to sewers and things, where further down the line there's often then perceived, problems, and people will all say, well, that's because 200 houses were built up the road and now we've got flooding and we didn't have it before, and so on and so forth. So we're interested in understanding those sorts of issues. However, I understand that, first of all, you've got a presentation to make to members, and I'll throw the floor open to you to do that. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Doug Clark. I'm the Growth and Water Efficiency Manager for Severn Trent, and with me I've got Paul Hercombe and Tim Smith. And together we're going to cover today a bit of background and an overview of overall supply-demand management and what we're doing to ensure we can manage water supplies. Also go into a bit more detail on the sort of future housing growth process and the role that we play as the water provider and sewerage provider on that. And Tim's going to finish off with a section looking at some of the flooding type issues. So in my first section here, I'm going to talk briefly about what we're doing on supply demand, explain why it's important and some of the challenges that we're facing. I'll be talking more generally as a water company. I'm not going to just look specifically at Leicester because we have quite an integrated grid of water supply, so we can move water north, south, east, west around our region to supply and make use of water as best we can. I'll talk a little bit about what we're doing in terms of our planning for our water resources plan, because we actually plan for a 25-year time horizon when we're looking at our water resources plan. So it's a kind of a 25-year plus view of where we are going to be on water supply. And then I'll also just touch very briefly at the end on how you can also get involved in that process as well, because we've had some workshops up to now. We've got some more coming up as well, and just so you're aware of those. Paul, as I say, is then going to look at housing growth and population growth, and Tim will cover the flooding. So moving on. Looking at what we're doing in terms of a water company. One of our ambitions is to make the region one of the most water efficient, and we aim to look to do this by 2020. We're empowering our customers already within the work that we do now to reduce demand for water, but we know we're facing really significant challenges over the next 25 years, and so we need to build on what we're doing now and look to do more to ensure that we can provide a sustainable water supply in the future. So where are we in terms of our performance to date? We've set ourselves a target of 25 million litres a day of water to be saved by 2020. We're well on track with that. We're well over 9 megalitres a day at the end of the second year, so very much on track to hit our 25 megalitres. We've also said that we will reduce leakage to 424 megalitres a day by 2020. And again, our outturn position at the end of March was 232. So again, very much on track to hit that target. But one of the other things that we see is incredibly important in how we will maintain sustainable supplies in the future is actually educating our customers and engaging with our customers so they know what they need to do to help us and also to help themselves. And this is both on the water supply side and also on the sewerage side, because we know that we have problems with sewer misuse, so things that are being put down the sewers that cause blockages and problems in terms of sewer flooding. We've made a big commitment to work with our customers and educate our customers to help them understand what they shouldn't be putting into our sewers to help reduce flooding risks. And so we're saying that we will educate 700,000 of our customers on water efficiency and sewer misuse messages by 2020. And again, we're well on track with that, with almost 300,000 delivered to date. Looking at the need to reduce demand for water, and I know it's an important issue for the council in terms of how do we accommodate future supply and demand. We know that over the next 25 years we're going to be facing the biggest challenge that we've ever faced in terms of supply and demand. There's a huge number of problems that are going to need to be addressed in terms of maintaining an affordable and reliable and sustainable water supply. We have, if you look at the slide on the left, I don't expect you to look in detail at what's on there. These will be circulated, but where we've highlighted the coloured sections and the little markers, those are showing areas where we know we have legacy issues in terms of our abstractions. So this is where abstractions may be causing harm already to the environment or have the potential to cause harm in the future. And so we know that actually to meet objectives under the Water Framework Directive and also the...
What are those maps of?
Sorry, I should explain. That's the Severn Trent region. If we look at this map on this side, it's probably the best one. That covers the Severn Trent region as a whole. And so the little gap in the centre is where South Staff's water would be. But that's the Severn Trent region. On this side, you actually have the local authorities that impact on the Severn Trent region, so that's why it expands out a little bit. So when we go over into Wales especially, obviously we only have parts of Powys, but actually the Powys area comes a lot bigger, so it makes it a slightly bigger map. So the map on the one side is our groundwaters and surface waters that are at risk, as I say. So where we know that there is either potential for harm in the future or there could be causing harm from over-abstraction now. So these are sources that we are investigating to look at how we can manage them more sustainably in the future to ensure that we can balance our supply and demand. On the right side, what I was portraying there, and I'll zoom in for the Leicestershire area shortly, is actually what we've collated from consultation with yourself and all of the other local authorities and councils on potential housing growth within these areas. And this is showing the growth up to 2045. And so what's important is the darker the red and the deeper the colour, the higher the percentage of growth. And you can see that certainly in the east of our region, we are seeing a lot of growth, and some of those are up to 40% plus potential growth across that time period. So we know we've got a challenge in terms of water availability because of the sources that are at risk and in ensuring that we protect the environment. And we've then got the second challenge that actually we're going to see housing growth, which is going to put demand on our infrastructure, both our water and waste, and therefore we need to plan accordingly to ensure that we are putting the right solutions in place to meet that growth at the right time. And it's important to reflect that the scale of the demand challenge is around about 200 million litres a day of water. That's around 10 to 11% of the water that we currently have available. So if we're seeing big growth in population and housing within the region, as well as a loss of supply, there's a real challenge, and we need to work very carefully to understand how we can manage that in the future. So that just jumps us in closer to the Leicestershire area, and you can see that we've got projections for population and housing, and certainly the housing growth has come from themselves. So where are we in starting to plan for this process? We have in terms of the way that the water companies are funded, we work on a 5-year funding programme with our prices controlled and regulated by Ofwat. And alongside that, we also have what is called our Water Resources Plan. And that is a rolling 25-year plan. So it doesn't just cover the 5-year funding period, it actually covers a 25-year period, and that moves forward. What we've looked at in terms of what we need to do for our demand management plan is, as a minimum, we need to be doing at least as much water efficiency type demand management as we're doing now. And similarly, when we look at things such as leakage, which is obviously an important issue for many customers, we already see that actually we still need to continue to cover leakage at similar rates as well. So this 5-year period, we're looking at a 6% reduction in the levels of leakage, which as I said, we're well on track for. As a minimum, we see that will continue in the next plan. And so we've already said that we will bake into our plan as a minimum what we're doing now. This has received great support from our stakeholders and the Environment Agency when we've taken them through these plans. But then our view is we need to probably do a lot more. And so we've proposed a lot of enhanced activity to increase this by around about 50%. There are kind of ceilings of how much we can do, because obviously when you're trying to reduce demand with customers, you're actually having to influence customers to do something differently. There are only so many customers that you can do those activities with. And so we're proposing a range of measures that will help. Included within those options is actually worked out with developers. So we touched on, at the start, you touched on the fact that new build and new housing coming into areas can cause issues. One of the things that we're trialling this year, and we'll be trialling up to 2020, is actually incentivising developers to put more efficient fittings in new homes, and also look at the drainage and the waste side of those new homes as well. And if they do things that are more efficient or reduce the impacts on the sewers, we're actually discounting their infrastructure charges. So we're the first company to have done this. And the programme for this year, we're actually offering a discount if they go to the optional lower level of the building regulations, so 110 litres per property per day. Next year, the developers are already aware of this. We are going to make it a little harder for them, and we're going to push down. And so they'll be, if they want the same level of discount, they've got to work it a little bit harder to get to that. But the aim and the objective of that is that any new build properties will be better in terms of their drainage, but also better in terms of their water supply. Now, obviously, new build properties only form a small part of the overall demand, but it is certainly something that we're looking at to look at how we can push that forward. And certainly we want to look at how we work with the councils on that sort of initiative as well, because actually mandating down to some of those lower levels is something that is an option to put into planning guidance, and therefore is something that we would be keen to work with you on and look at. Just to finish off, obviously there are other additional opportunities. There are non-household customers that use huge amounts of water. That market is a little more challenging for us to work in now because of the retail separation. So non-household customers can now choose their water supplier. They don't have to buy and use Severn Trent as their water service provider. And it is now actually separated off, and most customers, non-household customers in this region, are now served by Water Plus, but there are other retailers working in this area. We are looking at how we can work with those retailers to work on non-household demand as well, because obviously non-household users use a lot of water. And we're also looking at where innovation could make a big difference as well. So what are the new opportunities to actually help our customers save water? And so finally, before I hand over to Paul, just a bit on how you can get involved with our water resources management planning. We've had 2 stakeholder events already. Chris Bramley, I don't know if he's in the room. Chris Bramley from Leicester Council, I know, was involved in the last of the stakeholder events that we've had, and I know Nick Logan from the City Council also attended. The next event is in the autumn, where we will have a view of our overall draft plan, where we see the challenges and what we're looking to do to resolve those challenges. So I really certainly invite the council to look to attend in autumn. It's likely to be September, but invites will come out to the council at the relevant time. And so unless there are any questions now, I'd like to hand over to Paul.
I think we'll keep going. We'll do the presentations, if that's okay,
Yeah,
and then
sure.
we'll take questions.
Yeah, great, thank you.
Thank you.
Turn your finger off.
Well,
Okay. So Doug's sort of talked through the water supply aspect, and the focus of my sort of slide deck is primarily to look at how we accommodate new development in the sewerage system. But in places I do sort of touch on how we deal with it from a water supply perspective at a sort of more local level, from a distribution level. So the first slide I got really is just to give an overview of what Severn Trent are responsible for. So as you know, we're regulated by Ofwat, and principally we act under the Water Industry Act 1991, and that governs what we're accountable for and what we shouldn't do. But primarily for the sewage system, we're there to provide effectual drainage. It's not clear exactly what effectual means, so there's a little bit of ambiguity there, but that's what the Act says. So we need to provide effectual drainage for sort of current customers, and also plan for future development. The duty to provide public sewage system is primarily there to take away domestic sewage, and from a surface water perspective, it's there to take the roof water and sort of the appertaining areas, the yards, areas relating to properties. We're not there to take sort of industrial waste, but we can do, and there's a mechanism in place under the Act where we can accommodate industrial waste. And highway drainage, we're not there to take highway drainage, but again, there is provision within the Water Industry Act to take highway drainage, but that's not our principal role. So at the bottom, we're not responsible for draining highways. We're also not responsible for land drainage. A lot of the issues we get with our sewage system is where land drainage could fail and then inundate our sewage system. And even though that's not our remit to sort that out, if it's impacting our customers, then clearly we need to work with whoever's sort of causing that issue to resolve the problem. But it's not our responsibility to sort of fund those issues. And also, we're not responsible for maintaining water courses. So that's just an overview of from a regulation perspective. The next slide just goes into a little bit more detail to sort of give an emphasis that we are quite heavily regulated, and there are rules that we need to abide with. So with regards to development, again, the Water Industry Act, there's various bits in there, so I'll just rattle through these fairly quickly. So the bit about effectual drainage, that's covered up by Section 94 of the Water Industry Act. There's a similar duty under Section 37 to provide sort of potable water for new development. Doug's already picked up about the Water Resource Management Plan. That's picked up by sort of Section 37A, B, C and D under the Act. Often when they get new development, if they need to cross third-party land to connect to the sewage system, that can cause the developers issues sometimes. So what they can do is they can requisition Severn Trent to provide a sewer within the boundary of their site. That's the same for water supplies. So Section 41 and 98 of the Act dictate that. So that sort of enables the developer to make the connection. Once the developer's built the connection, then under Section 104, he can offer those sewers for adoption to Severn Trent, will take over that liability in perpetuity. And the important bit in the Act is Section 106. So a developer has got a right to connect, and Severn Trent can't object to that connection. The only thing we can do is if the actual mode of connection is not sound, and that's really just the actual construction element of making that connection, then we can reject it on that grounds, but otherwise we can't. So there's capacity issues in the system, we can't object on that ground. But clearly we need to work with developers so we don't get to that point in the first place. And I'll pick up in a few slides' time as how we deal with that. And then lastly, under Section 185, if there's a water main or a sewer pipe that's crossing a development, then the developer can ask for us to move that main out of the way. It's at their cost, but we've got an obligation to do so. So that's just an overview of the duties we've got under the Act. But clearly that needs funding, which is on the next slide. So again, within the Act, there's mechanisms for funding. So as part of our 5-year regulatory cycle, we submit a plan to Ofwat, and as part of that, including all the elements about sort of leakage, water quality, sewage treatment works compliance and all that sort of thing, there's also funding within that to deal with sort of existing sewer flooding issues, but also there's funding within that to accommodate new development. Clearly, as part of the balance of that, there's also the desire to keep customer bills as low as possible, and that drives primarily the timing of investment and getting the confidence that development will happen, because we don't want to be in a position where there's a sort of a rumour goes around there might be 1,000 houses built. We do our calculation, go, we need to provide capacity for that. we build the capacity and then it turns out to be, oh no, they're not building there, they're building somewhere else. So we've sort of wasted customers' money building capacity in the wrong place. So it's that balance of getting enough certainty that you need to build capacity, but not leave it so late that you're sort of on the back foot. So we're currently putting we're currently in what they call AMP6, that's Asset Management Plan number 6, which covers up to 2015, and we're currently doing AMP7, which is Plan number 7, which is quite apt. So that we're putting that in the moment, putting that in for submission next year. We're going for various consultation to get all the information together so we understand what level of investment we need to put in and what our commitments will be to customers. That will get determined in November 2019, and then that will inform the investment needs for 2020 to 2025. And as part of that, there's elements in there again which are regulated that pick up how this will impact on sort of customer bills, infrastructure charges, and like Doug said, we've got some incentives in there to try and get developers to sort of work with us and do the right thing to get benefits, not only from the water supply side, because clearly if you've got less water going in a property, you're going to have less water coming out there that needs to be treated, but also from a surface water management perspective. There's also elements in there with regards to requisitions and diversions about so the mechanism for how developers have to sort of contribute to those elements of work. So overall, this regulatory cycle, the aim of it is to make sure that whether it's Leicestershire, whether it's Staffordshire or wherever, there's enough money within that plan to be able to meet the needs that will happen in that sort of 5-year cycle. So when it comes to sort of managing sewer capacity, what we've done since we started them in 1984, I think it was, we produce or carry out sewage management planning, and the aim of this is to enable us to understand sort of 4 key elements of the sewage system. So from a hydraulic performance, so we can understand what the sewer flooding risk is, and also if we've got a good model to understand what the current risk is, we can then sort of put various scenarios in the future. So if this growth happens, what would the impact be? If we had X% climate change increase, how would that affect it? So we can understand what the impacts will be, and therefore it allows us to plan where we need to invest. It also allows us to pick up operational issues, so we can to understand where our blockage risks are, where we've got sort of hotspot areas where sort of customer misuse might be a particular issue. We've also, from that, we can look at structural conditions. So clearly, our assets are ageing, as are all other utilities. But what it allows us to do is to understand the deterioration rates, what condition the assets are in, but also understand if there was an issue with it, what would the consequence be. So again, we can prioritise investment. And then lastly, from an environmental perspective, we've got sewer overflows on our system, so we can understand how they perform, what the impact could be on the watercourses, how sort of blockages could impact on sort of pollution issues. So within the remit of the SMPs, we can model various scenarios and understand what our system performance is, and what the future performance could be, taking into account the various pressures we can get. So overall, we've got 186 catchments across the whole of Severn Trent region. They pick up all sort of 9 million of our residents. We've got 37,000 of sort of main sewers, and then following the private drains and sewers transfer a few years back, we've got about another 37,000 additional assets we now look after, primarily around the sort of back of properties. We've got 4,350 pumping stations. At the end of the system, we've got just over 1,000 sewage treatment works, and then downstream of that, we then need to deal with the sludge, and then we've got 34 treatment facilities, which most of them have got sort of energy recovery type plants on there, so we just get the gas recovery and generate electricity. So, as I say, we've got these models, and as part of that, we can run various different scenarios. So, what we can do is plug all these different parameters in there and say, this is our current performance, but also what would the performance be in 5 years? And clearly we've got more confidence in the 5 years because we'll be picking up sites which have planning permission. We've got more certainty about what's happening in that 5-year period, but also similar to the Water Resource Management Plan, is looking at a 25-year future. Now that 25-year future, you do start getting into the uncertainty about, well, where could the development go? So we use the local plan information to inform that, and any other information we've got, so we can get a feel for where the pressures might be, and therefore that gives us the focus to look at where we need to sort of track changes, and also allows us to prioritise where investment needs to be targeted. So within our plan, we've got funding to resolve a lot of these issues, but ultimately it's the sewage management planning process that gives us the sort of certainty that that's the area we need to invest in. Within Leicestershire, I think we've got 18 sewage management plans. They're primarily based on sewage treatment catchment areas. So it's not a case of it's only like 10% of the overall number. It just depends on the size of the catchment. So Leicester, for instance, that will be the whole of Leicester draining to one lip will be one SMP area. Clearly we need to address some of the issues that we have at the moment. So Tim will pick up a little bit more detail about the sort of sewer flooding. I've only touched on it very briefly at this point. But again, to inform the sewage management planning process, we keep a register of all properties that are at risk of flooding. So we understand how often they're flooded in the past, what the impact is on customers, the area that's affected. So what we can do is then prioritise those lists so we know which areas to prioritise first, and that covers the whole of the Severn Trent region. That's informed by the sewage management plant model, so we can verify incidents to understand whether that incident is caused by hydraulic overload of the system, where there's interactions with other sources of flooding, or whether the issue might be primarily related to sort of blockage risk rather than hydraulic incapacity. This AMP period, we're spending £120 million to relieve sewer flooding issues. We're also working with the LLFA because a lot of the issues we find, we've got interaction with multiple sources of flooding. If we just sorted out our flooding issues, then customers could still flood from other sources, from overland runoff and the like. So rather than just sort out one source of flooding, what we're trying to do is to resolve the problems with all issues. So it's not just a case of you won't flood from the sewers now, but you still flood from the watercourse. It's trying to find a one-stop solution and work with partners to deliver that more efficiently. So we've got this £120 million to put sort of permanent solutions in. But to protect some of the customers in the short term, we put property level resilience measures in there, so they're putting floodgates in and non-return valves, which in the interim provides that sort of protection to customers to reduce the risk of flooding. And it gives us time to, when we're sort of moving down our sort of priority list, it sort of protects those properties until we get to the point where we can sort them out. So the aim is just to stop customers flooding, and then work down the list and sort out the underlying capacity issues when we can. So from a development perspective, the main concern we've got is about surface water, and a lot of the historic problems we're currently resolving, they all relate to surface water. So on a dry day, just the sewer system usually works fine, rather than getting blockages now and again. But one of the issues we face is with again, from a customer perspective, paving over the front garden is a big issue we get. So that not only impacts on the amount of flow going into the sewer system, which was never designed for, it also compounds the impact from changing weather patterns. So we're getting sort of more locally intense rainfall events, so we're getting more sort of downpours. We've also got that downpour falling on more sort of hard-standing area than the sewers were designed for. So that causes sort of issues which we then need to try and sort out. It's also not helped by the fact that developers have got an automatic right to connect under Section 106 of the Water Industry Act, and there's nothing a water company can do other than try and work with the planning authority to give us time to provide that capacity before the development gets approval. And through our planning process, we've got an asset protection team that sort of liaises with the councils to try and influence these areas. But ultimately, if a developer gets planning permission, then we've got to sort out the problems. So we're not statutory consultee in the planning process, but we do often get, well, the majority of times we do get consulted at the planning stage, and we've got processes in place to feed back our concerns, should we have any. So we can't stop development, so that's why we can't object, but we can seek drainage conditions. And in this AMP period, in addition to the £120 million, we've also got £40 million we're spending to provide capacity to accommodate new development. So that's sort of the proactive development. So if we've got our modelling work indicates connecting 1,000 properties to the system will increase flood risk, then part of that £40 million will be to make sure we've got the capacity improvements in place so it doesn't cause that problem. And ultimately, if we don't spend the level of funding that we've agreed with Ofwat and agreed with our customers as part of our planning process, that will impact on the targets that we've been set. So we've set quite tight targets by Ofwat from a flooding incident perspective, and also from a pollution perspective. If we didn't resolve sort of the known flooding problems or accommodate new developments, that would have an impact on the incidence of pollution risk, and will ultimately result in a potential penalty for Severn Trent. So as part of the, just gone over 2 pages. Pardon? Oh, no, yeah, no, 2 pages. So to pick up new development, so there's an automatic right for developers to connect under 106. The additional foul flow from new development pretty much has a negligible impact on capacity because it's a very, very small flow. And like Doug said, if it's the desire to reduce the amount of water consumption going in, then that will have a net effect that the water coming out of these new properties will be low. The main issue we have is with connection of surface water. So under Section 106 at the moment, there is an automatic right for developers to connect whatever they want to our system. And in extreme cases, they could connect unlimited amount of surface water into a foul system. And then it will leave Severn Trent to then sort out the issues relating to it. That can cause big issues. And one of the issues that we've got is they've got an automatic right to connect to a sewage system, but they haven't got an automatic right to connect to all the sources like a highway drain or water course. So the first port of call is I'll connect my flow into Severn Trent system, and we just need to deal with that basically. Where things have sort of changed recently is that back in April 2015 there were changes to the planning process that made the legal flood authorities statutory consultees in the process to make sure that surface water on new development is managed sustainably. So from a sort of hierarchy perspective, for sustainable drainage, there's like there's a hierarchy of what they should be looking at. So the first one will be rainwater reuse, which again impacts on what Doug spoke about. So it releases the amount of pressure on new system, on sort of water supply. It also reduces the amount of sort of outflow coming to the sewage system. Second one is trying to infiltrate to ground, so that's just trying to mimic sort of the natural sort of greenfield environment for new development. Thirdly, connect to a water body, but again in a controlled manner, so it's trying to mimic what was there before the development happened. And then it's a case of if those 3 areas don't work, then it's a case of look at a connection to the sewage system, principally connecting to a surface water system, but there is still that right to connect to a foul drainage system. But again, it needs to be in a controlled manner, and that's where working with the lead local flood authority is vital from our perspective, because under Section 106 we haven't got any teeth to stop a developer connecting, but through the planning process there is some sort of teeth there to make developers sort of act responsibly. And to be fair, most developers do act responsibly, and they work with us, and we've got some great examples where working with developers has not only saved the developer a lot of time of hassle, it's also saved us a lot of hassle as well, and money obviously, and that reduces the impact on customer bills. So we've got an asset protection team that work closely with the local planning authorities through the planning process, and also the legal flood authorities to make sure that we can accommodate development. And then if our modelling work indicates we need to provide investment, that's where that £40 million is there to upsize the sewage system. And occasionally we need to ask for drainage conditions, but in most cases that doesn't constrain development as really, because from a timing perspective we can usually get sewer capacity improvements in the ground within sort of 2 or 3 years, depending on the complexity of the system. And usually from getting planning permission to starting on site and actual properties being occupied, the timing's usually not that far out anyway. So I've got a bit of a graph here, or a little chart sort of showing how things work. So from our perspective, and I said earlier, what we don't want to do is start investing in areas where we haven't got confidence development will happen, and we end up having abortive expenditure. Against it, it's inefficient and causes impacts from a billing perspective. So starting off on the left-hand side, the first thing we do is we try and engage where we can and where we're asked to through the local planning process. And I've got a slide in a second sort of showing the response we send back for those. So that'll impact into the local plan development, primarily through water cycle studies. And that's basically just looking at for potential development, is the water resource to supply new developments? Can we get it to the property? And then afterwards, from a waste perspective, is the sewage capacity, is the sewage treatment capacity to make sure that we can complete the water cycle so it doesn't have an impact. As and when we get more certainty regarding development locations, that's when our sewage management plans will kick in and they'll start looking at various options, say if that development's happened, what would you do? But at that stage, it's sort of fairly high level because we still don't have a great deal of certainty. But then we get to a point where we'll get a developer involved, and when we get a developer involved, from our perspective, we've got that confidence that it will happen, it'll happen fairly imminently. But it also allows us to then work with the developer and say, well, where are you looking to connect? Because we can make assumptions and say, well, they'll probably connect over there. But often we find out the developers will come along and say, no, that's when I'm going to have my open space over there, or I want to develop over here and do whatever. So we need to work with the developers when they start looking at the master plans. And that's when we can then start looking at the nitty-gritty about where you're connecting, what the flows are, doing the detailed modelling. And then on the back of that, we can then start agreeing drainage solutions. Where we need to, we can kick off capacity improvements. So by the time the development commences, in most cases we've got the capacity in place, or we're getting close to providing that capacity. So by the time the development's completed, capacity's been in there, there's no issues, everyone's happy. And that's the ideal that we're trying to aim for. And through the planning process, through the planning stage with developers, there's various service level agreements to respond within a certain time period, and that's monitored by Water UK, which is then fed back to Ofwat. So that's just a high level of how things go through, and a lot of that depends on, as we go through the process, we get more and more certainty as to when we need to provide that capacity. So I mentioned water cycle studies. So we often get consulted as part of the local plan development about potential development locations. So on the back of sort of housing land availability assessments, we often get consulted and say, well, look, we've got 20 sites, we need to pick 5 sites to meet our development needs. From a drainage perspective and from a water perspective, which are the sites that could be constrained? So again, we use our sewage management planning information to inform that discussion, and it's aimed to be fairly high level because we don't know the specifics about, other than it's 1,000 houses, we don't know where they're looking to connect and all that detail. But what it aims to do is to do a basic sort of RAG assessment, traffic light assessment, to indicate where there's likely to be capacity constraints and where there's not. Now, on that example there, there's a red site, and that doesn't mean that a developer can't connect to that area, because going back to the first slide, under section 94 they've got in section 106 we've got an obligation to provide capacity for planned developments, and the developer's got a right to connect. What it does do is try and flag up where there could be an issue, and therefore hopefully prompt further discussions, so we don't end up with a developer coming along and it's a case of we need to have 3 years window to build the capacity. So that's the aim that we do. We don't get all councils don't do water cycle studies. It's something that the councils initiate. The Environment Agency support them, but we where we can we sort of feed in and try and sort of inform that discussion process. The aim of it by trying to be that when developments are allocated in a local plan, that when the developer comes along, there's no surprises and they don't say, I didn't know about this. We try and sort of feed that in as early as we can. So that's water cycle studies, and the last slide I've got is just picking up sewage treatment. So again, this is covered within Section 94, and having to effectively drain, because the sewage treatment works are part of the effectual drainage sort of remit. All of our sewage treatment works are consented by the Environment Agency, which take into account river quality standards. So as part of each consent, there's a volumetric consent to say that you can discharge up to 200 megalitres per day. But also there are quality standards as well, which pick up sort of the likes of BOD, ammonia, phosphorus, metal limits. There's loads of different things that we need to comply with. And if we don't comply with those, then we're at risk of prosecution from the Environment Agency and being hauled off to court to be fined. So it's in our interest to make sure if any new development comes in place that we stay within our consent. And if at any point we get new development coming in which is going to impact on the amount of the sort of volume within our consent or the quality parameters, then first off we need to get a new consent from the Environment Agency. And if on the back of that we then need to enhance the sewage treatment processes to meet the new standards, then again that's within additional funding. So this is outside the £40 million that I mentioned earlier on. That's just for sewage. There's additional funding as well within our sewage treatment pot to make sure we've got capacity. So as part of the planning for sewage treatment investment, where there's a trigger to go and do something at the works, whether it be we've got a pre-existing quality driver we need to improve, or we've got sort of capital maintenance issues we need to address, or there's already pressure because we're getting close to the existing Environment Agency consent, then as part of that we'll then look at the local planning information, statistical information to understand how much additional growth we need to provide for, so we don't end up just building for today and then going back the following year, because that's inefficient. And depending on the type of works, we can, and the certainty of development, we can sort of, and the type of process, we can build it in sort of modular form depending on the type of treatment process we've got. So that's how we sort of pick up the sewage treatment element of it, and then on the back of that there's also the sludge disposal, and they're sort of intrinsically linked. So increased growth at treatment works impacts on sludge, that will also be picked up as part of a separate process, and it'll be a similar thing that we've got funding to provide additional growth to make sure it's disposed of in a sort of safe manner, so it doesn't impact on environmental performance. So that's sort of quite detailed, but hopefully not too detailed for it on how we deal with development.
Okay, thank you very much for that very thorough presentation. Tim, did you want to add anything? Yeah, we could do that next if you'd prefer to hear that. Then pick up. Yeah, we'll do that, and then if you want to pick up any issues arising from that, and then we'll open it for questions from members. So I'm now going to ask Tom Purnell, Assistant Chief Executive here at the County Council, to tell us a bit about the specific issue of the growth plan, which was really the starting point for this piece of work. Are we able to cope with this from a point of view of water cycle, water and sewerage? So, Tom, if you could sort of set out how this is progressing and key timescales, and what opportunities particularly Severn Trent will have to input into that.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, what I plan to do in this presentation is provide a high-level summary of the purpose of the strategic growth plan, who's involved in preparing it, what it's likely to say about the scale of growth in Leicester and Leicestershire, and the next steps in taking the plan forward. The plan will be a non-statutory document, but I think it's fair to say its preparation represents a strong commitment from partners in Leicester and Leicestershire to work together to plan and manage long-term growth in the city and the county. It covers the city of Leicester and the county of Leicestershire, including obviously the 7 district council areas. And what it will do is set out in broad terms the scale and location of growth, including for homes and employment land, up to 2050. What it will do is it will set out figures up to 2031 and 2036, and then the direction of travel, if you like, in terms of strategic direction up to 2050. And what it will do is provide a strategic planning framework for the area, set to the context for the local plans, being prepared by the local planning authorities, but also an important framework for the economic investment plans of, for example, the local enterprise partnership, and for the investment plans of infrastructure providers, including obviously Severn Trent. And in the past, this sort of role would have been carried out by the structure plan or the regional plan, which obviously were statutory documents. But this is an attempt to plug the gap that's left by those no longer being prepared. I think it's important to say that the strategic growth plan won't decide precisely where development will take place, nor will it allocate specific sites. That will be clearly the job for the local plans. An important purpose not shown on the slide is that the plan also provides a mechanism for partners to cooperate on cross-boundary planning issues and long-term growth, and thereby fulfilling the duty to cooperate, which is placed on the local planning authorities and the county council, as set out in the national planning policy framework. The plan is being prepared by the 9 local authorities, and that's the City Council, County Council and the 7 district councils and the local enterprise partnership. There's a members advisory group largely made up of planning portfolio holders of the local authorities. That's overseeing the process, and it's supported by a strategic planning group chaired by one of the district chief executives with senior officer involvement from across the councils and the LEP. And there are about 1.5 full-time equivalent jointly funded posts in place to carry out the work. So we've put money in to give us the capacity to take this forward. A key role for the strategic growth plan will be to plan for future growth, and the key piece of evidence underpinning the plan is the HEDNA, the Housing and Economic Development Needs Assessment. Just checking I've got the right slide up. The partners through the Members Advisory Group commissioned HEDNA, and that was completed and published earlier this year. And what it does is sets out the objectively assessed need for housing and employment land, to use the jargon in the MPPF. So it sets out the quantity of housing and employment land needed to both 2031 and 36, both across the area as a whole and by local planning authority area. But it goes into more detail than that, setting out the type, tenure and size of new dwelling needed and the type of employment land needed. And what this slide shows is the scale of growth that the HEDNA indicates is required in Leicester and Leicestershire up to 2031 and 2036. So we're talking there about a total of just over 96,000 dwellings between 2011 and 2031, and nearly 118,000 dwellings up to 2036. And obviously that's a very substantial amount of growth. One of my colleagues characterises it as I'm not sure if this is precisely the right amount, but equivalent broadly to a market harbour every 2 years. So it gives you an indication of how much growth needs to be provided for. Clearly, since 2011, some of that growth has been provided for. Houses have been built. Some will have planning permission. Some is already provided for within existing local plans, but that doesn't account for all of the growth that needs to be provided for. And the strategic growth plan will be making proposals about those. The information is provided on a local planning authority by local planning authority basis. And you'll see from there, that slide there, that just over a third of the provision is required in the city council area. But we know that the city council area won't be able to meet those needs in its area. So another job for the strategic growth plan will be to decide how those cross-boundary issues are dealt with, and how provision is made in the county to deal with needs arising in the city. What I haven't shown on any of the slides is the employment land requirements, but there are details in the HEDNA on the types of employment land and the scale of requirement for employment land in the area. In terms of the process or in terms of other work that's underway, the HEDNA is just part of the evidence that's going to underpin the strategic growth plan. So I won't go through them, but you can see that there's a number of other work streams underway there, and they will inform work that's starting now to consider the spatial strategy for the area and the options for distributing that growth across the area. And that will require the members' advisory group and the constituent councils to agree on the content of a draft strategic growth plan, which will propose a distribution of development across the area for consultation. And what that we're anticipating that will do, it will provide district by district housing requirement figures, which will be based on the HEDNA, but which will apply policy to those, including dealing with overspill from the city, and also to take into account the policy direction which the partners have agreed together. So that could involve concentrated growth in particular areas. It could involve growth in corridors. It could, for example, include a new settlement. I'm not saying that it will, but clearly those options are being considered at the moment. And finally, in terms of the timeline, a strategic growth statement was consulted on last year, and I think Severn Trent were invited to comment on that. That set out the vision at some high. It was a high-level document around direction of travel and what the process was going to be. I mentioned the HEDNA, which was produced earlier in the year alongside a joint statement of cooperation. We're moving into the process very soon of considering what will be in the draft strategic growth plan, taking account of all of the evidence. And then later this year, a draft plan will be published for consultation, together with a memorandum of understanding around how cross-boundary issues will be dealt with the final plan published in 2018. And clearly, the consultation on the draft strategic growth plan, in particular, will give Severn Trent an opportunity to advise us on whether the proposed strategy can be met in water infrastructure terms, and what we might need to include in the plan around future infrastructure requirements to support that growth. But I think it's fair to say that those involved in producing the plan would welcome engagement with Severn Trent throughout the process, not just at that formal consultation stage.
Okay, thank you very much, Tom. Right, now, Tim, is there anything you wanted to pick up, having heard that?
15 minutes on flooding, the flooding questions that were raised.
Yep.
So
Yep, please do that now, and then we'll move to questions.
Would people be able to hear me if I stood up?
Yeah?
Yeah.
Yep. Well, thank you very much. I think that has been very comprehensive. It covered a lot of the issues I think that we had raised, and there's obviously a lot going on, and a lot more to this than meets the eye that you can get across in a written response. So I think it's been helpful that you've been able to come this morning. So I'm going to throw it open to questions. One issue that's come up in the last few days, and you got it on one of your slides, Paul, was this PR19, this price review. Can someone explain what this is and how you're involved, and what does it require? What's going to change as a result of it?
Sorry. It's part of the regulatory framework we have with Ofwat, and every 5 year all water companies have to submit a 5-year plan, which outlines for every activity that a water company does, both from doing the day-to-day maintenance from an operational perspective, all the way through to enhancing various areas of the programme, meeting new requirements from the Environment Agency to improve sort of water quality issues, needs from the DWI, investment we need to meet sort of new developments, whatever it is, that needs to be included in the plan and evidence to Ofwat, so that they can review it. And it's a bit like sort of a contract. Says if Ofwat, if you give X amount of money, which we can recover through customer bills, and this is the impact level on bills, then this is the obligation we'll deliver. And it sort of goes through a process. So it needs to be submitted next September 2018. Then Ofwat sort of go away, they review it, so we get challenged on it, and then they submit a draft sort of the middle of it'd be early 2019 we get that.
Early 2019.
Yeah, and then we will have the opportunity then to sort of feedback on these challenges, and then in November, December 2019, that's when we get the determination, and that will be when our obligations are sort of cast in stone that Severn Trent, you have got this amount of money to deliver all these different aspirations, and if you don't, then these are the penalties. If you overachieve, these are the rewards. So as part of that, sort of building that plan, ultimately it needs to be supported by customers. So we're going through a variety of sort of consultation processes at the moment at various different levels, to try and understand from a prioritisation perspective is what customers think should be our priorities going forward. So we can understand what areas of the plan to sort of focus on. So we can end up with a sort of a package of works that tick as many boxes that the customers want, but ultimately has the desirable outcome that so the impact on bills is as minimal as possible. So that's pretty much in a nutshell what the PR19 process is about.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Right, first of all, I've got David Jennings.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Gentlemen, a very interesting exhibition. Thank you very much indeed. I've learnt a lot this morning. You in the presentation it said you've got 8.95 residents that you look after. Well, in Leicestershire we tend to deal with properties, and obviously we're talking about an area bigger than Leicestershire, and I would just centre my comments on Leicestershire, but I think it would help me as a councillor to know how many properties you service in Leicestershire and how many you intend to service in 25 years' time, what you think the future numbers are going to be, so we'll get a rough idea of the expansion. But this morning's presentation has been based on new build, and we do hear that the existing system is insufficient. Now, if you keep tapping into existing pipes, they're going to get past their capacity. So I would have liked a little bit of information on what the proposals are to replace or improve the existing schemes.
So just taking that a bit further, you said you can't object to a connection on the whole it's going to be to an existing system, isn't it? It's not going to be a completely new system. At some point they've got to get into the existing system. Can you make them pay money to do that, or have you entirely got to fund that through the processes that you've explained, or can you say to the developer, yeah, we've got to do this for you, but we're going to have to charge you for it?
Again, this is all picked up part of the sort of the regulatory process, and within the process we've got various income streams, and one of them is an infrastructure charge. So for every property that connects onto the sewage system and to the water supply system, they have to pay a standard sewage charge, which again is regulated and agreed with Ofwat. And overall, that level of funding should be sufficient to cover what is needed on the sewage system to accommodate new development. So that picks up the so from a sewer performance position, if that's where it currently is, and the new development has a detrimental impact on it, that funding brings it back down to sort of the original base level, and then through the additional funding we have through Ofwat, we've then got this is what the current performance of the system is, and the aspiration through discussing with customers is if they turn around, which is always their highest priority, is we don't accept sewer flooding, that needs to be a high priority, then we've got additional flooding then to improve the performance. And clearly the overall aspiration will be to get to a point where no properties are at risk of like internal flooding or flooding to the garden, but clearly that's going to have an impact regarding to if from a pace perspective, if that aspiration needs to be brought forward, then that's going to cost more in the short term, and also it could impact on sort of the resourcing side of it. So it's a case of getting that balance to get to the aspiration of what level of sewer flooding is acceptable, on the basis that ultimately it needs to be funded through the regulatory process.
Well, indeed, my first question, I mean, there's 500,000 houses in Leicestershire, I'm guessing, I've not counted them. But if there's going to be a 20% increase, then do you have the capacity to cope with that? And will it put pressures on the existing system that can't cope, so they need replacement? It all seems to be about future build this morning, not the work that needs to bring things up to date.
The focus of this morning presentation was mainly about sort of development, because that was sort of a lot of the questions we were asking to be related to new development. But a lot of the legacy issues we've got are associated with sort of historic design practices well before Severn Trent were formed, about the way surface water was connected into the sewage system. So a lot of the sewage systems in town centres, they've just got a single pipe. So this goes back to sort of Victorian practices, where they used to have all the surface water and all the foul used to go in one system, and then at various points along the system they'd have an overflow relief pipe which would just dispose of the excess effluent to the nearby watercourse. And back in the day, when there's a lot of industry about, it probably improved the river quality than deteriorated it. But as we sort of moved along, it's sort of accepted sort of 1960s, 70s that we should have separate systems because it's sustainable. You don't end up putting anything into one pipe and you have to treat it. You also reduce the overflow risk. So a lot of the legacy stuff we're trying to address is how to manage the surface water that's historically been put into the system. Whereas with new development, because the focus is on that needs to be managed sustainably, a lot of most of the new developments, it'll just be the foul flow will come into the foul system. The surface water will be managed sustainably and either managed on the site or in such a way that the surface water runoff mimics what the greenfield runoff would have been. So new build, which was the focus of the sort of topic area we were asked to discuss, is more about making sure the surface water is managed sustainably so it doesn't come into the sewage system. And the historic legacy is making sure we try and address at a pace that is affordable the historic practice of putting sewage and surface water into a combined system.
Did you want to add anything to that, Tim? If I may, yes. The legacy issues that Paul's just spoken of are being addressed by these type of schemes. That's what we're saying, is that where we've got properties on the register that have flooded in the past and we know about them, we're doing assessments, prioritising those, and then making investments to try and reduce that risk. So a lot of these locations have got a lot of surface water that's getting into the foul combined system that's overwhelming it, and what we're doing there is trying to reduce that risk, so that we're dealing with those legacy issues. Right, got
Just keep us informed. Thank you.
quite a few people that want to speak. So got Terry next.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I'd like to take the opportunity to thank Doug, Paul and Tim for one of the most interesting hour and a quarter presentations I've had at a council in recent times, and thank you for coming. And I'd particularly like to echo what Tim sent in about the fact that we're best when we're working together. And I think that's a classic illustration this morning. Coming on to the questions, we've spent most of the presentations covering the removal of water and sewage from the properties. So my question's sort of in a couple of parts really. Number one, are you confident on the supply side that with the growth predicted, particularly in the Hedna, and with population growth as well in existing dwellings, that there will be sufficient supply side of water? And secondly, when it comes for the removal, and I think the best phrase, I think, in any presentation was impermeable area creep, which I wrote down. Is there anything that we can do as the local authorities to assist in preventing that area creep, which I know a lot of it is caused by increased car ownership, the fact that in years gone by, certain governments were trying desperately to restrict the number of car spaces per property, which has not worked, and people are now building on their front gardens. And so is this something we can do jointly as councils to look at that, perhaps even enforce more than we do in terms of making sure that such areas are semi-permeable and those sort of things? And finally, for some of the larger developments, particularly those built in the late 80s, 90s, etc., is there anything that could be done on retro build of sustainable drainage systems, which would then take pressure off of the existing system in the older areas where you might not be able to do it, but if we remove it in one place, it certainly helps everywhere else? And I don't know what ability there is to do something of that nature.
Right, who wants to tackle that? Quite a bit there.
Yeah, there's a few questions in there, so I think we'll tackle them between us. But firstly, on the supply demand side, on the slides that we showed up there, obviously one of the big things that I talked about was actually the pressures on water that's going to be available to us. And although I did have a chart on there showing we are projecting big housing growth as one of the factors that we have to consider within our water resources plan, which is a 25-year plan. The biggest challenge actually for us isn't the population increase. It's actually the restoring sustainable abstraction reductions that we're going to see, and the Water Framework Directive no deterioration improvements that we've got to make. And so it's actually on the resources side as opposed to the population served side, because the loss of sources of water is actually going to create a bigger hole in our supply-demand balance than actually the growth of population will see. And so in terms of how we're looking to tackle that, we are looking to work very hard on our demand management side. So that's looking at how we work with our customers to reduce demand from existing customer base to help accommodate new customers, but also working ourselves on our own networks on how we reduce leakage within those networks as well to, again, drive down demand further. So that will allow us then to accommodate any new growth. So in terms of actually being able to supply the water, we're reasonably confident on that over that 25-year period. It's just looking at what's the best solution in terms of how we balance that in terms of the supply and demand solutions. But certainly our intention, and following the guidance that's coming from government and our stakeholders, we're very much looking on reducing demand to accommodate any growth rather than looking for new sources of water. Do you want to?
On the second point about impermeable area creep, and that's a terminology within the water industry, but it's basically people paving over the front garden, so the area is actually sort of creeping a bit like the blob back in the 1950s film. I think it's 2008, I think there was legislation brought in to say that any front garden that was being repaved or being paved over that's more than 5 square metres needed to get planning permission if it wasn't being paved sustainably. I don't think that's ever been enforced. I think it's one of those things it's tricky to enforce. In fact, when I had my driveway repaved a year or so ago, I made sure it was connected to a soakaway. But when the contractors were coming out, and I was sort of asking the question, trying to sort of gauge if they knew about it, and quite a few of them didn't have a clue what I was talking about, which was a bit worrying. So I guess from our perspective, we need to sort of raise the awareness of customers that they've got a responsibility in the same way as everyone else has. So in the same way of don't put stuff down your toilet that's going to cause a blockage, so don't put fats, oil and greases down, don't put sanitary products down the toilets that could cause a blockage. The same applies to if you pave over your front garden, you might not think it's having a big impact, but collectively, if you do it, your neighbours do it, and all the people in the street do it, that can have a big impact on the downstream flood risk. So certainly, trying to enforce that would be good from a council perspective, but there's going to be a lot of resource there to do it. If it's a case of someone wants to pave over the front garden and it's going to cost them, I'm not sure what planning permission is, after £150 to get planning permission for it, they're likely to say, well, I'm not going to get caught for it, I'll just turn a blind eye. And it probably costs more for the council to go and police it than it would be just to leave it to Severn Trent to sort the problem out. So from our perspective, we need to sort of pick that up with the education side of it. But also, what we're looking to do as well going forward is to try and move the emphasis from what we've done in the past of we've got this additional capacity coming in the system. Let's provide more capacity, build concrete tanks, to an emphasis of finding out where it's getting in the system and then work with customers to de-pave and try and reverse that. So try and provide sort of incentives similar to along the lines that Doug mentioned about the infrastructure charge. So if you do this, you'll get a reduction. Do something similar to say to customers, if you de-pave sort of part of your front drive, we'll overall the surface water disposal charges for 10 years or something to try and reverse that. So that is a big issue that's caused an impact on our system. It's going to be a complicated one to try and reverse back because it potentially needs involvement with also 9 million customers. So that's going to be an issue. On your last point about the 1960s developments, the great thing about from 1960s onwards that even though there might not have been a surface water system currently there, so there's just a combined system in the road, nearly all new development from 1960s onwards had separate drainage. So the great thing about that is that we haven't got to go back in the estate and sort of separate everyone. It would be really costly. They've either got separate drainage systems, and then when they come out of the estate and they make the connection, they've got 2 separate manholes that are just connecting. So from our perspective, that's a lot easier just to go in and find out where we can get maximum benefit. And we've got a piece of the work on at the moment to identify. We know where these are because they're on the sewer records. Doing some modelling work to understand where we can get maximum benefit to disconnect them, and they'll be like the quicker wins to disconnect. The next stage is like once we've disconnected it, it's a case of like, well, where can we take it to? And in the past, it's always been a case of, well, you need to go sort of 5 kilometres down the road to get into a watercourse. But if we can build a suitable outfall with a sustainable drainage feature, whether it be similar to the one Tim showed in Lumbersthorpe Road, where we could sort of manage it, some of it can percolate out, some can evaporate, so that'll sort of manage it. And then worst case is that whatever's left, that might need to go back into the combined system, but at a rate that's controlled, so it manages the downstream flood risk. So there's things we can do, but we certainly need to reconsider the way that we work. But we also need the help of customers to get to this eventual aim, because a lot of the issues have been caused by sort of customer mispractice, because they probably don't understand, because no one's ever told them about the consequences of paving over just a small area of the front garden.
Thank you. That's very, very interesting that there are solutions to these, but they cost money, as you said earlier.
They do. Going back to that 1960s estate when they're all separate, they're the easy ones. If you've got a completely combined system, then in effect you've got to duplicate all of the sewer system. Picking up the road is the easy part, because you just need to reconnect the gullies up. But the disruptive part and the more expensive part, if you then want to pick up rain downspouts in customers' gardens, that's really expensive, really destructive, and it's an area that we probably wouldn't go to because it's just too problematic.
Okay, got Mrs. Richardson next.
Thank you. Thank you for a really informative morning. I'm a new member, so I've really enjoyed it and learnt a lot. Can I just ask you a question for clarification on the asset management plan? You talk about it quite a lot, but the plan you're working to finished in 2015, do you actually update? Is it a static document? The next one won't come in till 2020?
Sorry, yeah, I think that was a typo on Paul's slide. That the current plan is 2015 to 2020. That's the one we're working to. Apologies for that. And the one that we're building now and the one that we're sort of consulting on and our water resources plan is also aligned to as well in terms of the future investment is one that will run from 2020 to 2025, which we'll have the determination on in 2019. 2019. Yeah. Apologies for the typo.
Could I just come back
Yeah.
with a second question? You were talking about partnership working in this one-stop shop for the flooding. How long's that been going on, and how effective is the partnership between everyone? Is there any weaknesses in that at all? Because obviously at the time when people are flooded, you often hear about them being battered from pillar to post. So it's a brilliant idea. I just want to know how it's working.
I think it's a bit of a holy grail to have a one-stop shop because there's so many different authorities and agencies involved in flooding. I think the steer from government is, to work within the framework that we've got. We've got different authorities, different responsibilities. I think the most effective thing we can do is to make sure that we are working well together. And I think there's some good practice out there, some good pockets of good working together. But I think there's always room to do more, certainly on our behalf and all the other agencies. But I think getting right down to the encouraging signs that we're seeing now when staff here at the County Council are meeting with our local operational staff and big spreadsheet, and it's down to individual properties, what happened when, who's doing what next. You're going out speaking to the customer, okay, we've been out as well. Share really nitty-gritty sort of day-to-day stuff that might sound a bit droll, but that's what it comes down to, but that we're meeting up and we're talking about those day-to-day things. But I think that having a one-stop shop, we're probably a long way off from that, but I think that if we can work as best we can within the current framework and making sure that we're not passing people from authority to authorities, which can be a change from, okay, we get a phone call, oh, that's not us. We'll talk to our colleagues at the County Council about that and somebody will get back to you, rather than, well, it's not us, Gov. Go and speak to somebody else. And it can be as simple as that. It's just a slight change of attitude, and that's a sort of cultural shift that comes through organisations, and that takes time. But that's what certainly we're trying to work towards. We're not perfect at all by any means, but we're trying to embed that within our organisation and working with others as well. So does that help? Yeah.
Dr. Ryan.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I'm pleased to say that thanks to this excellent presentation and the great questions from my colleagues, most of what I was going to ask has already been answered. I thought that was very helpful, particularly for Mrs. Richardson, about how effective is this working together, because at the moment I think it's an aspiration rather than a reality from my own local experience. But aspirations are good. As I understand it, it seems that we're in a similar problem as we have with highways. I'm from Colville, which is an old Victorian town where we've got highways wanting to attach their properties in a similar way to the way that you do. And I've got the similar problem, it seems, with Section 106, in that highways only have to pay for the extent to which they increase capacity. The fact that we've got collapsing Victorian sewers they don't have to pay for. Am I right in getting that assessment that it's a similar issue? They've got a standard infrastructure charge. They plug in. If they're going to plug into one of my Victorian sewers that are combined, it's not necessarily their problem. It's yours.
So this is the link about. Well, I think what you're saying is that where a developer wants to build 100 houses, as the Highway Authority, we can't make them resolve the existing road and highway problems. We can only make them address the additional impact of the traffic that their development creates. And you seem to be saying that was a similar thing, that you can take this infrastructure charge off them as a set amount, but after that you've got to deal with the consequences of those 100 houses. And if there's lots of old sewers that they're going into, then you've got to try and resolve it. Is that a fair assessment?
Pretty much. And it's not so much that it's the old sewers, because a lot of the old sewers are putting in better condition than some of our recent sewers, because they were sort of built properly in the first place by Victorians that properly engineered them. So the age of the systems often is a little bit of a red herring, but obviously older assets can have issues because they've been there for a longer time. But they have got a right to connect. And from a highway perspective, highways can connect their flows into our system by agreement. But it's only when, if we do our modelling work, so at a scenario where highways say, well, I've got a big problem here, the solution is to resolve that, provide a highway drain. I'm going to have to lay a 6-kilometre highway drain down the road to this watercourse. But that's going to cost a lot of money, Severn Trent. You've got a drain there. Can we not connect into that? And we can't unreasonably deny a connection. So if the best thing to do, again, from working in partnership, is to say, well, yeah, we've got capacity in that, like say, surface water system ideally, then there's nothing to stop us saying, yeah, we've got capacity, therefore we agree to you connect in, because that's the best thing to do in that area. And similarly, there's reciprocal rights if we've got excess water to be able to use highway drains, again, to try and come up with the outcome that we're trying to aim of reducing flood risk.
Yeah. Just to clarify then, not strictly on highways, but we have got old combined Victorian sewers in my town, and people wanting to build new estates. If a developer is trying to put a nice new estate with properly designed sewers for foul and separate surface water, if they want to then say, well, we've got to connect into something that we know is already struggling in the area, that is not the developer's problem. That's your problem.
No. So they've got the right to connect, and we've got the obligation to provide that capacity.
The other question was then, I think one of you said, we're not going to talk about blockages and collapses. We're quite interested in collapses in Colville because we've had a few. How much of a problem are collapses of the old system?
Most of the issues, from a blockage perspective, and Tim sort of touched on it very briefly, that the overall flooding incidents we get, we're probably looking at sort of 10 to 20% hydraulic, depending on the weather patterns you get in a particular year, and then of the remaining sort of 80%, the majority of incidents are caused by blockage, and with most of the blockages being caused by things being put in the sewer that shouldn't be. The actual collapses, it's a very small number of incidents are caused by actual collapses, but what we find is the structural condition, because if a pipe sort of completely collapses, clearly it can't pass any flow, but what you find is over age, and one of the issues we get with Colville is because of the old sort of coal mining, the ground movement can affect the pipe, and often what will happen is you'll get a little bit of a snag, and that little bit of a snag, little pipe sort of sticking out, can snag on some rags and whatever coming in. So if it's a case of if it was just paper and poo going down the pipe, which is what should be in the system, that wouldn't snag. But when people are putting stuff down that they shouldn't do, that's when having an asset where there's a little bit of pipe protruding can snag. That then slows down the flow, and it can build up. So the age of the asset has more of an impact on sort of increasing the blockage risk, rather than from a collapse perspective. But that's why through our sewage management plan, we put cameras down the system just to see the condition, and that's prioritised primarily based on a consequence. So if it's a case of if that small diameter sewer did collapse, well, the consequence will be there'll be a little bit of flooding, but we can sort it out fairly easy. That'll be a pipe where we just look at it and go, well, we'll just deal with it as and when, because it's cheaper to do it that way. Whereas a case of we've got a 6-foot diameter brick sewer that's under the A50, if that collapsed, it'll have a massive impact. So they'll be the ones where we constantly CCTV to make sure we understand the condition, because the consequence of the collapse will be too great.
Okay, Alan Pearson. Sorry, oh yeah, okay. Sorry, Mrs. Taylor.
How's that for a gentleman, eh?
Thank you very much. Thank you for the...
Well, thank you, David.
Thank you for all that information this morning. That's very helpful for me as a new member to the council and this committee. My question is just about new developments. You mentioned that developers that put in more efficient fittings get a discount on their infrastructure charge. I'm just wondering what that discount is and how does it relate to how much the more efficient fittings actually cost the developer to what they actually save in their infrastructure, and what take-up is there by the developers on doing this? Are they mostly pro for it or are they against it? So the percentage of new developments that are putting in these efficient savings looking towards the future. And just on a second point, how far away are we from this possibly be going officially into planning guidance with local authorities, so we ensure that in the future we have more efficient fittings and better drainage as we move forward, in the next 25 years?
Okay, so number of separate questions there. The infrastructure discount scheme that we've got covers both the wastewater side and the clean water side. The current scheme that we're operating, discount scheme we're operating in this year, provides 100% discount on the infrastructure charge if they build to the optional standard within Part G of the building regs. So that's the 110 litres per person per day as a design standard for the building. The normal standard that they would have to build to under Part G is 125 litres per person per day. So it's a 15 litres per person reduction in terms of the design standard. In terms of the cost of delivering that for the developers, our assessments on that, and certainly the feedback that we're getting from the developers, is incredibly well received from the House Builders Federation and the like, is there shouldn't actually be an increase in cost for them to get to 110, because it is just about selection of some of the fixtures and fittings that they put into the property. So it's selecting the right flow rates on your showers, selecting the right flow rates on your toilets and the taps as well. To go below probably 100, there would be additional cost for the developers, because then you start having to look at potentially some reuse type options as well, so rainwater harvesting, greywater harvesting type solutions. So that's why we've set it at 110 at the moment. We're looking to push down to get towards 100 for next year, and so that would obviously provide bigger savings. In terms of the uptake, it's very, very early. This launched when we launched the new charges scheme this year, so we only launched in April. So we're waiting to see the level of uptake, and certainly for the initial properties that are built probably over April, May and possibly into June, many of those, all of their applications and things will have gone in before, and their designs would have been set before that. So actually we're thinking there's probably going to be a couple of months lag before we start seeing properties that are built to the 110. But we're certainly working closely with developers, and the response we're getting from them at the moment is incredibly positive. They're very supportive of this. I know other water companies are looking to mirror what we're doing and trial this. Anglian Water, for example, are looking at a trial starting next year, and I know Southern Water are also looking at a trial which I understand is starting this year, but that's only on some specific developments, not across the whole region. But certainly the idea of the scheme is that it will incentivise more efficient properties going in on the water side, but also if we can get the right surface water management in there as well, they can have discounts on the surface water management as well. Again, up to 100% on the surface water discount as well. So it's incredibly well received by developers, as you'd imagine, because anything that reduces the cost of their development is good, and certainly at the levels we're pitching at the moment, it won't have an impact on their cost if they're speccing the right products at the start. Okay.
All right.
Yeah, just the last question. Do you know, are you working towards this becoming planning legislation? Is that something you're working towards?
You asked that. So within current legislation, councils and local planning authorities can impose the optional standard, especially, and this is done in deficit areas, so areas of the country where there is a shortage of water. There aren't many of the councils in the Severn Trent region that have imposed the 110 standard as an option, but it is something that could be done as part of planning guidance. Obviously, what we're looking to do is, or what we would love to work with the councils on is, could we get the optional standard in as the planning guidance? We would then incentivise for below the optional standard, so down to 100. So it would give a little bit of a stick, I suppose, in terms of the planning guidance to get them to 110. But then we could then provide that carrot and incentive to say, well, if you go further than that, we will provide even more discount for you. So it's
pick up on that, how that, rather than have lots of individual district councils all deciding. Tom, could we put this in the growth plan as a route policy?
I think that could certainly be looked at. I think what it would need to be is a statement in the growth plan which would encourage all of the district councils to include it in their local plans, because it's the local plans that have got the statutory force, if you like.
Yes.
With the growth
But it could be a commitment.
But it could be a commitment that district councils.
Is that something you'd welcome?
We would very much welcome that, yes.
Okay, so that's something positive we can take forward. Are we all happy that we ask through the growth plan will be coming here September?
It'd be September or October, that's
yeah,
right, yes.
So it will be coming, but in the meantime, let's ask Tom if he can pursue that through the MAG.
I will do, and it would probably also be helpful if Severn Trent wanted to make that comment in their formal response on the draft strategic growth plan at that time.
Okay, thank you. Right, yes, it is now, Alan Pierce.
Yeah, I'm not new, but I'm new to this committee, so I was going to say I'm wet behind the ears. That was a bit of a pun, so forgive me, everybody. Actually, the biggest message I get is actually supply, and I think Tim, I think, mentioned it. And it's interesting, in this country, you have 2 weeks of hot weather, and then you have hosepipe bans or not enough water. So, and there was a bit of a flow on from what, of course, your comment about the 110. I'm half Australian. I live in when I go back, I live in Perth, one of the driest places on earth, and there's no question about rules. You don't waste water. You control the water, and the way buildings are built. But I'm just interested in that, but also in the infrastructure. A lot of research goes in the environment where we're cutting trees down that absorb a great deal of water as well, particularly in flooded areas. We tendency to have developers that seem to just chop trees down or that may replant some or not, etc. I'm also interested in the climate situation, because we read a lot about climate change. We always seem to perceive climate change as that we're getting wetter, but it could also mean we're getting drier, which could impact on your supply. I'm just interested, is there any statistics, figures and plans that you've got in place there as well?
So yeah. First of all, picking up on the climate change scenarios, in the modelling that we are currently doing for our water resources plan, we are actually include within that a whole range of different climate scenarios and what those would do in terms of our water supply, and so it's understanding what the impacts there was have from ranging from the very low scenarios right through to the high impact scenarios, to understand if we design our plan and we build our plan to meet these requirements in terms of supplying our customers, does it cover a broad range of different climate scenarios? Because there's still uncertainty over, as you say, what would happen. Is it going to be wetter? Is it going to be drier? Is it going to be that we don't have enough water in the summer but have too much in the winter? And so it's understanding when we build the plan, to build a plan that has almost the least regrets options, because it covers the most options in terms of what could happen in those future climate change scenarios. So it's a major part of our water resources plan, but obviously it also features on the waste water side in terms of what we need to think of in terms of sewer capacity, because certainly in terms of intense storm events that we seem to be seeing more of, having the right infrastructure in place and the right capacity to deal with those, so that climate change scenarios are certainly part of what we factor into the plans.
David Bill.
We've had too much water in the summer. If you just that point about the discount to new build, 110 litres. Just a thought. Is there any way which that you could encourage existing householders to improve their fixtures and fittings and perhaps have a discount off the water bill? Just a sort of off the, because most of the you said earlier that most of the problems are caused not by new build demands but existing build. So that's just a thought. This meeting is I think it's been fascinating actually. It's sort of in two parts though, isn't it? We're hearing great detail from Severn Trent, and I hope that we'll get a copy of the slides so that we can study them later.
Going to provide those to our committee officer. Is that okay? Your slides, you happy with that? Yeah, thank you.
And also, we've heard from Tom about the growth plan, and I'd like to have more details at a later date, perhaps it could be in the form of a joint report between Tom's people and yourselves on how these plans are going to come together. It's almost as if we're speaking slightly different languages because we're having to provide this growth, and Severn Trent are having to handle it. So perhaps it's that's too detailed to go into now because we've learnt so much this morning. So I'd like to study what we've heard already. I'm just wondering whether we could move forward. What your thoughts are about moving forward on this, Chairman?
How are you planning to engage, Tom, with absolute key stakeholders? So there's a range of people that I suggest you'll just say, well, send us your comments in writing. But on something as important as water and wastewater and sewerage, are you planning any sort of stakeholder events? Anything more than just send us your comments?
The engagement process is currently being designed, so I don't think a decision's been taken either way on that. But certainly, I can take back into those discussions the fact that it would be really valuable to have a conversation around water infrastructure, as indeed it will be for some other types of infrastructure as well. So if that's a particular message from this Commission back into the planning of the engagement exercise, then that would be helpful.
Yeah, so I think it's important that professionals from both the councils and from Severn Trent have the opportunity to sit down and discuss that informally, as well as having to put it down on paper in terms of a formal response to the growth plan. I think that would be quite useful. I mean, there may be a body already that exists that you could simply agenda it on, because you'd mentioned you were having meetings with officers through the lead local flood authority. So there may be a body already that we could just facilitate, as opposed to setting a specific meeting. But we'll leave that with you. Okay. All right, David? Is that happy? You're just going to answer the point about trying to retrofit existing and older properties.
So yes, we have quite an extensive programme actually trying to work with existing properties and existing customers. Part of our plans at the moment, we actually provide a service where we, as well as providing free devices that customers can fit themselves, we actually provide a service where we will go into customers' homes, undertake an audit of the home, and actually fit devices for free. We did 12,000 properties last year. We're looking to extend that to do 20,000 properties this year. But within our draft options for our water resources management plan, we've got included within that options to offer that to 100% of our customer base. So that is in there as an option, because we certainly understand that going into customers' homes, engaging with them, because most customers don't actually understand that at times they're wasting water. And so by engaging with them and getting them to understand how they use water in their home and where they could make very small changes that could actually make a big difference is a really effective way. And the impact of the programme that we've been doing to date, as I said, we did 12,000 last year, we did 6,000 I think the year before, so data set of about 18,000 properties. We're seeing about a 10% reduction that we're measuring in the consumption within those homes, so a big impact on the water use for very minor changes in terms of what the customers are either doing or how they're using water. And so certainly within our plans and our options for our future planning, we've said we are looking up to offering this to up to 100% of our customers.
We used to put bricks in the cisterns, didn't we? But you can't get into the cisterns now because everything is so sealed in and everything.
Yes.
So I look forward to that, and you're very welcome to come round to our house and show us how to save water.
So, I mean, I think...
We use one bath for 7 kids.
So I think the issue there is that there needs to be some more communications and publicity around that, because I don't think that's well known. No, we probably slip it in the annual bill leaflet, but then everyone's encouraged to do it online now. So perhaps there's some comms that could be done around there usefully together with us in terms of, well, we have a magazine that goes through every door 3 times a year. Perhaps we could ask you to write an article or something about the benefits of that, and you'll get it through every door in Leicestershire.
Yeah, sorry, can I just... Sorry, come back.
I'm just going to join in there.
Oh,
You don't mind saying it. Sorry, is that on? No, it is education. I think we all know that. And then we're talking about the education you mentioned. I was going to mention earlier, particularly with the existing customers, because that's your main bulk at the moment. And you can make some incredible savings, I believe. And again, it's not reinventing the wheel, of course. I'm sure you're going to look at other countries that have mentioned where water is as nearly as valuable as oil. It's that scarce. I think we can learn a lot of lessons from other people.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you want to come back on that?
Yeah, just to pick up on that. Yeah, certainly that opportunity to engage more with customers and looking for different channels to reach more customers, so more customers are aware. With the programmes I talked about in terms of going into people's homes, we only get about a 20% uptake on the customers that we talk to. In terms of, we're there, we actually speak to the customers, we still only get into about 20% of the homes. And so more awareness from other bodies, and certainly the offer of potentially getting something out to the people that live in Leicestershire would be great, because actually getting messages through other channels and other partners, actually when it's not coming from the water company, they sometimes listen a little more, because it's sort of, well, why is the water company telling me to use less water? Whereas if someone else is involved in the messaging as well, it adds a little bit of weight, and it's other people that they would listen to. So, yeah, thank you.
Another useful thing we could address together. Right, I've got Rosita now.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Now, we've already reflected on an awful lot of issues today, and I think it's been really valuable, and the outcomes are there. But I've got a couple of points, and I firstly like to put you on the spot again. I mean, we are working already very close together, but how can you see that our relationship here can be improved more to enhance the objectives, but also how do you feel that the relationship with district councils and their local plans and their planning application can be enhanced more, because that is the very, very basic step, and there are lots of issues that could be put in place in the first place. So that is my first question. Also, then leading on to that, what benefit can you see, and I know we've talked around it, but with more engagement in the growth plan? Because, again, that is very, very important for the future. So where can you see yourself engaging more, and so we can put the sort of basis into that? Now, on your slide somewhere, you said there was a housing growth forecast until 2045 you have done. Now, I'm interested on what basis has that housing forecast been made? Now, it really needs to join in with Tom's growth plan at some point. So if you can answer that. Then I am personally very, very keen in water management and effective SUTs. And that goes back to probably addressing that in the growth plan and putting it towards authorities. Now, for instance, developers are not always keen because of the cost to putting in effective SUTs. However, that is the only way forward in managing water effectively. So how do you see where we can help there? Also, for instance, you talked about your responsibility in surface water running off the roofs. Now, abroad, that rainwater has to be used for toilet flushes, etc. Now, is there any way that you have thought about initiatives and encouraging developers to reuse rainwater or whatever in future plans and incentives? And my last point, and I think that's more towards Tom. Now, we have got a very, very effective team here that works with flooding. We also have got a very effective team that works with the housing and growth plan. But we do not have a flow chart and a structure, who does what and how we communicate. For instance, I used to communicate when I was on the Regional Flood Committee with Chris and the relative officers, but then that information wouldn't go any further in the team. So if we had an effective flow chart of internal communications and whatever, then it's also handy for instance, the Environment Agency, the Severn Trent, to know who their contact point is and how to feed through that system. Thank you. Over to you, and hope you come back at one point.
Right, quite a few issues there. I think the point on the planning applications we touched on before when you came, that when you get a response, it just says no objection, or no comment. What would be really helpful if you could just, I know it's time and resources, but if you could just give a little bit more detail why there's no objection. Is it possible to give a bit more? So often it's, you want conditions attached. So you were saying earlier, then you can negotiate with the developer. It might be around timing and so on. So you want a condition, you want details submitted, exactly how they're going to do the SUDs and so on and so forth. But the majority of them just say no objection, and that's very frustrating for councillors on planning committees.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. We've had a few issues where sort of customers that sort of don't want the site or whatever, or they've got concerns about the site, will look at the planning our sort of response and say, Severn Trent said no objection, but they don't read the bit about the because of. And I think it's the because of bit that we're not very good at explaining what's what. So I accept your point there, and it has been fed back on a few occasions to our asset management people who liaise. So I'll take that back and reiterate again that we need to sort that bit out. So it has been raised previously, and I kind of understand fully where you're coming from with it. I think the main thing from a planning perspective is if it gets to the point of having to respond back saying that we've got no objection because of, and we need to do X, Y, and Z, that should be no surprise to the developer. So even if before it gets to that stage, that right at the very start when the local plan's being developed and the sites are being chosen, what we want to try and do is to flag up where we've got issues, so when it does become that site for other reasons ends up being in the local plan, that the fact that we need a certain period to provide the drainage capacity is already made aware at that stage. So it's not a case of like, this is in the local plan, I can't develop it because Severn Trent said they haven't got capacity. It's a case like, yeah, we know that's why it's been put back in years 5 to 10 in the local plan to give time to do it. So there's that element of it, and also what we try and do is to encourage developers to contact it as early as possible before they even get to the planning stage, so that we can have that dialogue with them to understand what they're looking to do, how we can service that need, and also if there are constraints, work with the developers, say how can we sort that out. So it might be a case of yes, we need to upsize this length of the sewer, which might take 3 years to do, but in the interim there are some temporary measures we can do to, if they're looking to pump into the system, we can put some nighttime pumping arrangements in there, so we can work with the developer so it doesn't delay them, but also it doesn't increase the risk to existing customers. So there's things we can do as part of that. And it's all about getting that early engagement. So that picks up the two topics that you mentioned about sort of the planning process. Doug said it was pick up the housing growth forecast bit of that. Yep.
Yeah, so on the housing growth forecasts, the team have gathered information from all of the local authorities that serve our region, taking their plans, projecting those forward. So different local authorities are at different stages within their plans. Some are adopted, some are not, and some are under review. And so we did the first sweep was kind of August to October last year, where we gathered in all of the information that was available at that time. We then updated that again in January time, based on a second sweep to understand, have any of those plans changed? Are there plans that have now been adopted across different areas? And in terms of actually projecting up to 2045, obviously you have much greater certainty over what's going to be happening in the short term. And for many of the areas, they only project up to a shorter period, and so we had to extrapolate data to get up to the 2045 period. So it's for many, it's not an absolute certain number, because we have had to extrapolate based on the data that they're providing in the early years, and so it varied from council to council as to how accurate those plans may be.
If I just may come back, in some local authority there have been previous permission granted, in some areas say up to 3,000 or 4,000, but they are separate to the local plan allocations. So have they been taken into account, or purely your local plan predictions?
So historic stuff is in there as well. So it covers a lot. So I'm trying to think of some examples. So similar to the sort of local area plans, the local plan that you have for distributing the growth that may not be able to accommodate from the Leicester City area. Similar in the Birmingham patch, they have shortfalls of stuff that was allocated previously, that we are looking at how we accommodate that, and the same would happen for anything here. So it's that potential for stuff that is in the future plan, but also making up shortfalls from historic is also there. So, shall I do rainwater as well before I forget? So rainwater and grey water harvesting and the like. So we've been quite active in this area, and we've actually been running a number of trials and pilot projects, also sponsoring some research projects and engineering doctorates, looking into how we could increase the levels of rainwater harvesting and rainwater reuse. We've even undertaken trials in partnership with some social housing companies. So we've been working with Accord Housing to fit grey water harvesting in some of their homes. We tested those rigs for just over 2 years to monitor the impacts of what would happen in those. At the present time, I have to say, the availability of technology that works in a sustainable and cost-effective way for the householder isn't there. At a non-household level, so working with commercial customers, there are much bigger opportunities on rainwater and grey water reuse, especially on the rainwater side. And certainly I know in Leicestershire, Sainsbury's, for example, to mention one sort of group, they've been very proactive in putting rainwater harvesting within their new stores that they've been building around this area. And so it certainly can be made to work on a commercial level. Trying to get it into people's homes and making it work on a domestic level is proving more challenging. But we are still looking at that, and we're actually working with companies in Australia as well, and Singapore, looking at what's been done there on water reuse options as well. So we are trying to pick up what are the new options that are out there, what are the new solutions that we could do, and how could these impact on our future supply-demand balance. So it is something that we're working on.
SUDs, because I think they are very, very important in going forward. Is there a possibility to work with our housing and growth team to get something into the plan as suggestions? Because not only do they enhance the aesthetics of a development, but they are effective in particular with climate change.
On the SUDs. I think it leads nice on to the SUDs question you raised, and like I say, they're often seen by developers as SUDs cost more. The SUDs don't cost more. It's the fact that the land take means you can't build another 5 houses, and that's why they cost more. But a lot of that, I guess, it's raising the expectations when the sites are allocated, to make sure that from an affordability perspective, the developer can make the level of profit that he wants to make on it, but also take into account that you also need to build SUDs. And one of the issues with sort of SUDs design is often the drainage in general. That's usually an afterthought. The first thing is you'll get a green site, you'll give it to an architect, and we'll have a road down here, and we'll have this over here. And then when the master plan's sorted out, it'll be a case of like, oh, we need to drain this site. You give it to the drainage engineer and go, right, drain that. And they'll look at it and go, well, it would have been great if you put the green space at the bottom of the hill, because I could put the SUDS features there. Instead of turning around at the last minute and going, well, those 5 houses need to be sort of not built because we need to build the SUDS feature. So early engagement and making it aware that the site allocations consider SUDS. The developer's aware of his obligation to build SUDS, and I think they are aware of that. And also, you picked up about SUDS, and SUDS, they often get seen as being a way of managing excessive flood water, and that is a big element of them. But the other element is the amenity benefits, the biodiversity, and also the visual aspect. So if the design of the SUDS features is taken into account as part of the overall master plan, they can be seen as a way of enhancing it. So it might be a case of you can't build those 5 SUDS features, the 5 houses because you need to build a SUDS feature, but the SUDS features you build, they enhance the price of the houses, so that they offset the fact that you can't build as many. So I think it's all doable, but it needs to be brought up at an early stage and look at SUDS as a wider sort of context of what they're there for, and not just building them for flood attenuation.
Just on the SUDS features, there's an issue about the maintenance, long-term maintenance of them. Developers very rarely want to retain, once they've left the site, they want to get rid of it. Now, originally the government said there was going to be a duty on county councils to adopt them, and then they stepped back from that, and there's no requirement, and because of funding reductions and so on, it's not something we've been able to do. But I know there are some old SUDS facilities, more like balancing lagoons and things like that in my area, that you do own. Do you have a policy? So, for example, if a developer is willing to pay a significant commuted sum, do you have a policy about taking over these and managing them?
The policy at the moment is that we don't adopt SUDS features, principally because under again, that come from legislation, Section 104 of the Water Industry Act says that the water companies can adopt sewers. It doesn't make reference to adopting SUDS, and the changes to the Act back in 2014, they changed another part to say that water companies, to fulfil their obligations to effectively drain, we can build sewers and we can build SUDS. And because they changed that bit, but they didn't change the adoption element, it seemed to reinforce that no, they do just mean we can adopt sewers and not SUDS. So there's some work going on at the moment. There's all the water companies, they group together under a body called Water UK, and there's an initiative going on at the moment because we're aware of all these issues about developers saying, well, we've been asked to build these things. Schedule 3 of the Flood and Water Management Act wasn't enacted, so we've been asked to build them. The LNFA are making sure they're being designed to a right standard, but then we're left with this legacy of who's going to maintain them. So you end up in really odd scenarios where you get a new estate. Severn Trent will charge the customers for connecting into the service water system, which then runs down the hill into a SUDS feature that the management company own. So they get a bill off us for the service water disposal and a separate one from the management company, which doesn't seem right. So we're working with Water UK at the moment to look at ways of allowing water companies to adopt SUDS features going forward. It's always been Severn Trent's sort of preferred choice is that we're the best people to take them on because there's that direct interaction with the service. So there's work ongoing at the moment, and hopefully middle of next year, might take a bit longer. We hope to be in a position where we can start adopting SUDS. But we need to discuss with DEFRA, with Ofwat, and hopefully avoid having to have sort of changes in primary legislation, because that will just delay the process. So we can do that. But strangely enough, over in Wales, the Welsh Government are looking to enact Schedule 3, so they will be taking them on. But England's for whatever reason, we're just carrying on the way we do at the moment.
That's very interesting. So we might be able to sort of apply a bit of pressure there, or that would be DEFRA, would I assume that would
it'd be
make
DEFRA
that decision.
and Ofwat. So DEFRA are aware of the discussions we're having with them. The water industry is just saying, well, we think that the right thing to do is for us to adopt them. In order to do that, we need some sort of adoption criteria. So we're just ploughing on regardless, going, we think the right thing to do is to do it. We're getting this manual developed. I've got a meeting on Friday with developers, Water UK, and the people writing this guidance to start formulating this. So it's moving forward in the right direction, and we're hoping there will be enough momentum then for the DEFRA to say, yeah, just carry on and do it if you think it's the right thing to do.
Is that supported by the RFCC and the Environment Agency, because it is a holistic approach, really, isn't it? So they're supporting
and they've been party to the discussions.
Wonderful. And can I come back on my first question is, how do you see where we can help improve the system? What can, we add to a better working relationship all around? So you must have some ideas, but if we put it on record now, we can implement it.
I think it's been said earlier that it's just about keep talking. Yeah. So we're starting to make those sort of partnerships and liaison with people. And at the end of the day, it's people that deliver a lot of this. And working in partnership, the hope is going forward that we can end up being more efficient with the way we deliver stuff. So if we've got an issue at the moment where there's a sewer flooding issue and a watercourse issue, then it seems daft that our contractors turn up and do the sewer bit, and then someone else's contractors turn up to do that bit. It'd be a lot better if we come up with saying, well, forget who's going to build it, what's the best solution, and then determine if the best people to do all of it is the water company and they get a contribution to do that from somebody else, or the best thing to do is for the Environment Agency to do it and the water company contribute to it. Then if that's the best approach, then that will deliver efficiencies, so you end up with a better solution and a cheaper solution. But that just needs doing more and talking.
So clear lines of communication and manual flow charts would help you, would they?
It would help, but I think it's one of those things, first off, when you've got a problem, make sure you understand the root cause of it. And you don't get into this blinkered approach of, that's nothing to do with me. Well, it might be, therefore just be open about it. And also, it's not a case of, well, the first person on the scene is Severn Trent, therefore, you turned up, it must be your problem. So again, it's managing the expectations of customers that even though Severn Trent turned up, it might be their problem, it might not, but it's likely to be a mix of everybody. So therefore, it's impacting on the customers. Customers don't care what colour water it is. They don't know. Tim's got a great slide showing someone's front lounge flooded, and he's got it colour-coded. So that bit's from the sewer, that bit's from the river. It's all, you could colour-code it if you came colour-coded, but it's all just brown muck, and people don't want it in the front lounges. So let's just, as professional people, let's just sort it out so it doesn't happen. But that just needs people talking to each other.
Right, I think that's a good place. Everyone's had their say to draw it to a close. I think, as everyone has agreed, this has been a very useful session. It's much easier to have a dialogue like this and try and communicate through constant emails. Yes, of course. Now, just need to draw members' attention that when we were going to have this discussion in March and the agendas went out, we did receive one letter from a resident who wrote to his local member, Ivan Old, gentleman in Witherley, raising a number of issues. They're too detailed, really, to go into really in this meeting. But it's got quite a lot of technical questions about sewers and drains, and there's even a table about structurally defective private sewers and so on. So really the question is how the best way to deal with this. Should we take some advice from Anthony? Would it be to ask our colleagues in Severn Trent whether they could input into preparing some sort of response to this gentleman, and then work with our LLFA colleagues to put that together? Is that something you could do? Because there's some quite technical issues being raised in here.
Yes, certainly we can investigate. I don't know the particular instances and things that he's referring to in here. So I think we would need to take this away, investigate, and feed back to UBS. Certainly happy to help with the response.
Good. We dealt with that then. Right, so it just remains me to thank you very much for coming this morning. We'd like to continue to have a dialogue. I'm sure we will do that through our officers, and the key outcome is that Tom's going to look at how you are going to be fully engaged and consulted in the growth plan, which brings us back to the original issue of our concerns. And we will also follow up looking to support you as an industry in the issue of SUDS adoption.
Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you. We'll just pause for a minute while Severn Trent clear. We've got one final issue.
Bye, thank you.
Right, I hope you all agree that was useful. It's certainly easier to talk to people and to continue dialogue by email. So I think that's a positive session. Right, so we've just got to deal with the annual scrutiny report, which was agenda item 10. Now, to some extent, there's not anything much to influence here. It is a report that goes back, looks back over the work of scrutiny. We produce this every year. It does go to council for council to see, so that all members have opportunity. But I think, particularly for new members, it does give you an indication of the range of issues that scrutiny has looked at over the past year, both the work of this commission and indeed of the individual committees and panels and other bodies that sit below this to do more detailed work. It really gives a flavour of what's gone on in the last 12 months. So,
can I say, Chair, page 13, is that photograph taken 15 years ago, or is it?
No,
Microphone.
it's not. No, that was only 4 years ago.
Microphone, it's still recorded.
Yeah. And you see, not everyone's here still, and indeed some people moved on to other responsibilities. But it gives you an idea. This will be prepared again next year, and obviously it'll have an input from new chairs. Has anybody got any questions or any issues they want to raise before it goes? What we need to agree today is to accept it and send it on to the... Yeah,
Sorry,
I think...
anything you can advise as we're all relatively new? And
I think that the only thing I'd picked up on, and I think it's been better this year, is that all the committees wanted to have the opportunity to input into it. So although it comes here to sort of sign it off and to present it, it's important that the work of each individual committees, the scrutiny committees, do think about this. So as they're going forward, if they feel that they've done a worthwhile piece of work and they've achieved something, they should flag it up to the office then to say, we'd like to see this in the annual report. That would be the best advice I could give you. So, apart from that, we're all happy with this. Sorry, Terry?
I think it's a lovely report. It's just that it's page 13. It's a little bit out of date in that it says that you wish to thank those who are not standing in the coming May County Council elections. If we tidy that up, and
yeah, you're right.
Otherwise,
we should.
I'm more than happy with it.
Should correct that. Right. Okay. So if we're happy with that, we'll agree to forward that on to the full council. The date of the next meeting then is the 19th of July, and that's 10:30 a.m. start. We're not quite sure of all the items on the agenda yet, but the Scrutiny Commissioners have a meeting to finalise that a few weeks before. So when the agenda comes out, obviously you'll have all the papers and so on. If there are any issues in the meantime, then please contact myself or Rosie or our committee officer if you need any advice or help or any issues that. So the other aspect is going forward. I'm sure there'll be things that you want to look at and get on the agenda, either by way of a report or whatever. So if you want to be thinking about that, again, please, through your Scrutiny Commissioner or group leader, raise any issues that you'd like to see built into the work plan of this committee. The growth plan is going to be key. It's going to be a very important piece of work for us to oversee that during the autumn. Okay, thanks very much. I'll close the meeting and you all go and get lunch.